Brooksville was a quiet town until one night changed everything. Henry Lawson, a middle-aged man, was found unconscious in his backyard. His head was bleeding, and the scene suggested a violent struggle. The police arrived within minutes. The evidence pointed to one suspect, Daniel Carter, his next-door neighbor. Daniel was arrested that same night. Witnesses claimed to have heard a heated argument between him and Henry earlier that evening. A footprint at the scene matched his shoe. And the biggest blow, someone said they saw his shadow near Henry's house just before the attack. For the Carter family, everything fell apart. Olivia Carter worked long hours as a nurse, now struggling to afford a defense lawyer. Their daughter, Lily Carter, only 8 years old, refused to believe her father was guilty. But the town had already made up its mind. To them, Daniel was the attacker, a violent man who lost control. Yet, something didn't add up. There were gaps in the story, details that didn't make sense. And the truth? It would come from the most unexpected person, a little girl, who saw what others ignored. Brooksville wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. Beneath its quiet suburban streets, tension had been building for months. Daniel Carter and Henry Lawson had never been close. At first, their disputes were minor in argument, over a tree branch hanging over the fence, a complaint about loud music. But things escalated when Henry made plans to extend his driveway. The problem? It would encroach on Daniel's property. Legal threats were exchanged. Heated words turned into public shouting matches. Neighbors took sides. Some saw Daniel as difficult, unwilling to compromise. Others believed Henry was the real troublemaker, always pushing boundaries. Then, something strange happened. Daniel started noticing unfamiliar cars parked near his house at night. His garbage cans were knocked over repeatedly. He even found nails scattered across his driveway. At first, he thought it was just bad luck. But was it? On the night of the attack, the air was thick with tension. Olivia had just put Lily to bed. Daniel stepped outside for some fresh air. Across the street, Henry's house was dark, silent. Then came the scream. Sharp, sudden. It cut through the still night like a knife. Daniel turned his head toward the sound. A few lights flickered on in the neighboring houses. Moments later, a car sped away down the street. Its headlights barely illuminated the figure lying on the ground. Henry Lawson, motionless, blood pooling around his head. A neighbor called 911. Within minutes, sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Officers rushed to the scene, scanning for any signs of the attacker. But there was nothing. No footprints, no weapon. Just Henry, unconscious, and a security camera that should have captured everything except. It had mysteriously stopped working earlier that day. The police started questioning residents. That's when a witness stepped forward. A man walking his dog claimed he had seen someone near Henry's house. He couldn't be certain, but he described the figure as about Daniel Carter's height and build. That was enough for the police. Within an hour, Daniel was in handcuffs, his wife and daughter watching in horror. Daniel protested, swearing he had nothing to do with it. He told officers he had gone for a walk just before the attack, but there were no witnesses to confirm his story. His alibi was weak. Too weak. At the police station, the questioning was relentless. Where had he been? Why had a witness placed him near the crime scene? Did he have a history of violence? The town turned against him quickly. News spread like wildfire. Daniel Carter, the man who had feuded with Henry Lawson for months, had finally snapped. Or at least, that's what people believed. Olivia struggled to keep up with legal fees, working extra shifts to afford a defense attorney. Some neighbors stopped speaking to her. Others whispered behind her back. But while everyone else saw Daniel as guilty, Lily Carter saw something else. Fear. Confusion. A puzzle with missing pieces. She was only 8, but she knew her father. And she knew deep down that something didn't add up. And if her father wasn't guilty, then who was? Lily Carter was only 8 years old, but she wasn't stupid. She had spent days watching her mother struggle to keep the family together. She had seen the way people looked at them now: pity, judgment, even fear. She had heard whispers at school, cruel words from kids repeating what they'd heard from their parents. Her father was in jail, and no one seemed to care whether he was innocent. No one except her. Lily started writing everything down in her notebook, every detail she could remember from the night of the attack. The things people said, the things people didn't say, the way certain neighbors acted, and one name kept coming up: Victor Hargrove. He lived 2 houses down, a quiet man, always keeping to himself. He had never been close with her family, but Lily remembered something strange. The night before Henry Lawson was attacked, she had seen Victor standing in Henry's yard. It was late, too late for a normal visit. He had been messing with something near the front door. Lily hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it seemed important. She flipped through her notebook, trying to piece everything together. That's when she remembered the security camera. Everyone had said it was broken, that it had conveniently stopped working before the attack. But what if it hadn't just stopped? What if someone had broken it? Lily needed to check for herself. The next afternoon, while her mother was at work, she grabbed her bike and rode past Henry Lawson's house. The crime scene tape had been removed, but the house still felt eerie. She stopped near the front porch, pretending to fix her shoelace. That's when she saw it, the security camera. It was still there, attached to the wall, but something about it looked different. The screws. They weren't covered in dust like the rest of the house. Someone had touched them recently. Her heart pounded. Someone had tampered with that camera, and the last person she had seen near it was Victor Hargrove. Lily rushed home, notebook in hand, determined to tell her mother. That night, as Olivia Carter sat at the kitchen table, exhausted, Lily climbed onto the chair across from her. She took a deep breath. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Olivia barely looked up. "Not now, sweetheart. I have a headache. But it's about Dad." That got her attention. Olivia sighed, rubbing her temples. "Lily, we've been over this. The police have evidence. There's nothing we can do." Lily opened her notebook. "But what if they're wrong? What if someone else hurt Mr. Lawson?" Her mother exhaled sharply. "Lily, I saw Mr. Hargrove near his house the night before the attack. And the security camera, it was messed with. I think he did something to it before it broke." Olivia closed her eyes. "Lily, that's enough." "But Mom." "Enough." Her voice was firm. "I know you want to help your father. I do too. But this isn't a game." Lily's throat tightened. "I'm not playing." Her mother stood up, her face filled with exhaustion. "Go to bed, Lily." Tears burned in her eyes. She had hoped her mother would believe her, that she would listen. But just like everyone else, she didn't. Lily clenched her notebook tight. If no one else was going to find the truth, then she would. No matter what. The courtroom was silent as the trial began. Daniel Carter sat at the defense table, his hands clasped together, his expression unreadable. Across the room, Olivia Carter sat in the front row, tension in her eyes. And in the corner, gripping her notebook tightly, was Lily. The stakes had never been higher. Deborah Simmons, the prosecutor, wasted no time presenting her case. She laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece. The long-standing feud between Daniel and Henry Lawson. The heated arguments. The fact that Daniel had been seen near Henry's house the night of the attack. And most damning of all, the weak alibi. This was an act of revenge, Simmons declared. An act fueled by anger. The evidence speaks for itself. The jury watched closely. Some nodded. Others remained expressionless. Mark Ellison, Daniel's defense attorney, stood to counter the accusations. But it wasn't easy. The prosecution's case was strong. There was no physical proof tying Daniel to the attack, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Ellison tried to cast doubt on the timeline, on the reliability of the witness who claimed to see Daniel. But the jury didn't seem convinced. And Daniel Carter? He could only sit there, helpless, as his future was decided. Lily couldn't take it anymore. That night, she made a decision. She snuck out of bed, her heart pounding, and rode her bike across town to Mark Ellison's office. The lawyer nearly jumped when he opened the door to find an 8-year-old girl standing outside. "Lily?" he frowned. "It's late. You shouldn't be here." "I have proof my dad is innocent," she said, holding up her notebook. "You have to listen." At first, Ellison hesitated, but something in her eyes' determination, desperation, made him pause. He let her in. Lily flipped through her notes, explaining everything. Victor Hargrove. The night she saw him, near Henry Lawson's house. The security camera that had been tampered with right before the attack. Ellison leaned forward, rubbing his chin. "You're saying someone deliberately disabled the camera before Mr. Lawson was attacked?" Lily nodded. "And I think Victor did it." Ellison was silent for a moment. Then he grabbed his phone. This might be enough to shake things up. The next morning, court resumed. But this time, something was different. Ellison stood up. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call an additional witness to the stand." Thomas Caldwell, the judge, raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Ellison turned to the gallery. "Lily Carter." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Deborah Simmons objected immediately. "Your Honor, she's a child. This is highly irregular." Judge Caldwell adjusted his glasses. "Is the witness willing to testify?" Lily stood up. "Yes." More murmurs. Olivia's breath hitched. Daniel looked at his daughter, concern in his eyes. After a long pause, the judge nodded. "Proceed." Lily walked to the stand, gripping the edges of the chair as she climbed up. The bailiff swore her in. Ellison approached, his voice calm. "Lily, can you tell us what you saw the night before Henry Lawson was attacked?" Lily took a deep breath. "I saw Victor Hargrove near Mr. Lawson's house. He was messing with something near the front door. At the time, I didn't know what it was, but now I think. He was messing with the security camera." The courtroom went still. Deborah Simmons frowned. "Objection. This is speculation." Ellison held up a document. "Your Honor, I have here a report from a private investigator confirming that the camera was deliberately disabled, and we now have a name tied to that action." Judge Caldwell looked at the report. His expression darkened. Ellison turned back to Lily. "Lily, why are you telling us this?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she held firm. "Because my dad didn't do it." The courtroom erupted. For the first time since the trial began, Daniel Carter saw a glimmer of hope. And just like that, the case had taken a brand new turn. The revelation in court sent shockwaves through the case. Judge Thomas Caldwell ordered an immediate investigation into Victor Hargrove. The prosecution, forced to reconsider their stance, agreed to delay proceedings until new evidence could be reviewed. And that's when Detective Samuel Brooks got involved. Brooks had been skeptical at first. A little girl's testimony wasn't usually enough to reopen a case. But the details Lily provided, especially about the security camera, made him pause. He pulled Victor Hargrove's records. That's when the first red flag appeared. Hargrove had financial troubles, a history of disputes over money, and more importantly, a connection to Henry Lawson, one that had been overlooked. According to old reports, Lawson and Hargrove had been involved in a failed business deal years ago. Money had been lost, and from the looks of it, Hargrove had never let it go. Brooks dug deeper. Phone records showed Victor had contacted an ex-convict named Frank Mitchell just days before the attack. Mitchell had a history of breaking and entering, assault, and intimidation. It wasn't proof, but it was a lead. Then, something happened that turned the case upside down. It was late at night when Olivia Carter heard a noise downstairs. A faint creaking. A shuffle. Her heart pounded. She reached for her phone, about to call the police, when the living room door creaked open. A figure stepped inside. Frank Mitchell. He wasn't here to rob them. His eyes were cold, calculating. Olivia barely had time to react before he grabbed her wrist. "You need to stop digging," he growled. "Tell your lawyer to back off. Tell that little girl of yours to keep her mouth shut." Terror gripped her. But then, a sound. Footsteps. Mitchell turned just as Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her notebook. "Let my mom go." There was no fear in her voice, only defiance. Mitchell sneered. "Go back to bed, kid. This isn't your fight." But Lily didn't move. She stared him down, eyes blazing. A siren blared outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Mitchell froze. Then, bang! The front door burst open. Detective Brooks and his team stormed in. "Hands where I can see them." Mitchell hesitated. Then, slowly, he raised his hands. It was over. With Mitchell in custody, Brooks pressed him for answers. At first, Mitchell refused to talk. But when faced with the possibility of decades behind bars, he cracked. He confessed that Victor Hargrove had hired him to scare Henry Lawson over an unpaid debt. But things had gotten out of control. And Mitchell wasn't the only one involved. Another name came up: Robert Langley. Langley was a small-time crook, someone who had done odd jobs for Victor in the past. And unlike Mitchell, he wasn't fearless. When the police found him hiding in an abandoned warehouse, he didn't even try to run. He was terrified. And he had proof. A ledger. A small, worn-out book filled with records, payments, threats, debts collected by force, names, dates, transactions. And at the center of it all, Victor Hargrove. The evidence was undeniable. With the ledger in hand and witness testimonies piling up, Brooks made his move. Victor Hargrove was arrested at his home, still half asleep when the police knocked down his door. His face, usually calm and controlled, was twisted in shock as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Henry Lawson, still recovering from his injuries, confirmed the story. Victor had attacked him, and he had framed Daniel Carter to cover his tracks. 2 days later, Daniel Carter walked free. Lily was waiting for him outside the courthouse. He knelt down, eyes filled with emotion. "You did this." Lily smiled, tears in her eyes. "I told you I would." Daniel pulled her into a hug. Olivia joined them, holding onto both of them like she never wanted to let go. The nightmare was over. Or at least, they thought it was. Because the next morning, an envelope arrived at their doorstep. No return address. No name. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You don't know the whole truth." And just like that, the story wasn't over yet. The trial was over. Daniel Carter was a free man. But freedom didn't erase everything they had been through. The scars, both seen and unseen, would take time to heal. The Carter family tried to return to normal. But what was normal now? Daniel struggled to reintegrate into a world that had once turned against him. People still whispered. Some still doubted. Olivia did her best to hold the family together, but the stress of the past months had worn her down. And Lily? She had changed too. She wasn't just a little girl anymore. She had seen how the system worked, how easily the innocent could be blamed, how fragile justice really was. And she refused to let it happen to anyone else. One evening, as the family sat together, Lily spoke up. "We should do something." Daniel looked up. "Do something?" Lily nodded. "There are other people like you. People who didn't do anything wrong, but still got blamed. We should help them." Olivia hesitated. "Lily, we're not lawyers, but we can still help." And she was right. So, they did. With Daniel's case gaining media attention, the Carter family launched an organization dedicated to helping the wrongly accused. They worked with legal experts, advocates, investigators, People started reaching out, asking for help. Slowly, the Carters turned their pain into purpose. And for the first time in months, things felt right. Until the letter arrived. It came on an ordinary morning. No name, no return address, just an envelope sitting on their doorstep. Daniel picked it up, frowning. He opened it carefully, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. 4 words. You don't know everything. His stomach dropped. Olivia leaned over. What does it say? He showed her. Silence. Lily stared at the note, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Who sent this? She whispered. No one had an answer. Daniel's mind raced. Was this a warning? A threat? Or worse, was there still more to the story? Outside, the wind howled. The world moved on. But inside the Carter household, one question remained. Was the real story ever truly uncovered?